Hi everyone, welcome back to the LitCenter channel. In the last video, we traced the beginnings of Latin literature from Rome's earliest villages and oral traditions and into the rise of the Republic. In this video, we continue our journey into Latin literature with the Augustan Golden Age. After decades of civil war, the Republic has fallen, and Augustus now rules as Rome's first emperor. It is in this new political and cultural landscape that writers like Virgil, Horace and Ovid emerge. No poet is more closely connected to the age of Augustus than Publius Vergilius Maro, or Virgil as we know him today. He was born in 70 BC near Mantua in northern Italy, far from the bustle of Roman politics. Yet his poetry brought him into the circle of Augustus' trusted advisor Manilius, where he became one of the leading voices of the new regime. Virgil's earliest works, the Eclogues or Bucolics, written in the 40s BC, were pastoral poems inspired by the Greek poet Theocritus. On the surface, they described shepherds, rustic landscapes and songs of love, yet beneath the idyllic setting lies the turmoil of the times. Confiscated farms, displaced peasants and the longing for peace after years of bloodshed. Already, Virgil was weaving contemporary Roman experience into borrowed Greek forms, giving pastoral poetry new depth and resonance. Virgil's next work, the Georgics, seems at first like a straightforward poem about farming, because it talks about plowing the fields, tending the vines and caring for bees, but beneath its surface it is much more than a farmer's manual. The poem reflects on labor, order and the fragile balance between human effort and the forces of nature. But it is with the creation of the Aeneid that Virgil secured his place as Rome's greatest poet. Written in 12 books and inspired by Homer, the poem follows the Trojan hero Aeneas as he flees the ruins of Troy and journeys to Italy, where his descendants will one day found the city of Rome. Along the way, we see some of its most famous episodes. His doomed love affair with Dido in Carthage, his descent into the underworld to glimpse Rome's future, and the fierce battles in Latium that end with his victory over Turnus. But the Aeneid is more than a simple tale of adventure. It ties Rome's origins to the heroic age of Troy, it gives divine sanction to its destiny, and reflects Augustus' vision of a renewed empire after years of civil war. Yet Virgil does not make Aeneas a flawless hero. He is often torn between personal longing and the demands of fate. And the poem's ending, Aeneas killing Turnus in anger, leaves us with a sense of unease rather than triumph. That tension between glory and sacrifice is what makes the Aeneid so powerful and why it has been read and studied for over 2000 years. When Virgil died in 19 BC, the Aeneid was still unfinished, and he reportedly asked for it to be destroyed. Augustus, however, made sure it was preserved, recognizing its importance. In the centuries that followed, the poem became central to Roman education. School children practiced reading and writing its verses. Public figures cited it, and later European writers from Dante to Milton drew inspiration from it. In Virgil, we see the golden age of Latin literature at its peak. His work forms the bridge between Greece and Rome, and it is often said that with the Aeneid, Roman literature finally reached equal footing with the ancient epics of the Greeks. If you are interested in the works of Virgil, and specifically the Aeneid, I have an entire video devoted to this subject. You can find it on the channel. If Virgil gave Rome its national epic, then Horace gave it its voice in everyday poetry. Born in 65 BC to a freedman father in Venusia, Horace's early life already reflected the fluid but competitive world of late Republican Rome. He actually fought against Augustus during the Civil War, serving as a staff officer in Brutus's army. But after receiving a pardon, he returned to Rome and slowly built a literary career. His fortunes changed when he was introduced to Manilius, the powerful advisor and cultural patron of Augustus. Under Manilius' protection, Horace enjoyed not only financial stability, but also the freedom to craft some of the most elegant and enduring poetry in Latin literature. Horace mastered several genres, for example lyric odes, satires and epistles, each revealing a different side of his genius. His odes are polished, carefully structured poems that adapt Greek lyric forms into Latin, celebrating love, friendship, wine, and the simple pleasures of life, but also offering reflections on fate and mortality. The famous idea of Carpe Diem, seizing the day, comes from Horace's verse, capturing his blend of wit and philosophical resignation. His satires and epistles, on the other hand, are written in a more conversational style, where he gently mocks human follies, critiques Roman society, and even reflects on his own flaws. What makes Horace so distinctive is his balance. Unlike the fiery passion of Catullus or the grandeur of Virgil, Horace's poetry values moderation, wit, and refinement. He became the poet of measured wisdom, offering lessons that felt both deeply Roman and yet universal. And in doing so, he ensured that his works would remain at the core of education and literary culture for centuries, just as essential as Virgil's Aeneid, but speaking in a more personal and human register. Ovid was the youngest of the great Augustan poets, born in 43 BC just as the Republic changed into the Empire. Unlike Virgil and Horace, who lived through the turbulence of the Civil War, Ovid came of age in a Rome already firmly under the control of Augustus. His career unfolded in a city that was wealthy, secure, and eager to enjoy its new position as the capital of the Mediterranean world. His early works, like the Amores and the Ars Amatoria, the Art of Love, captured the sophisticated, sometimes scandalous world of Roman romance. Witty, playful, and often irreverent, they made him immensely popular among readers, but less so with Augustus, who promoted stricter moral values. This tension would eventually define Ovid's fate. His masterpiece, the Metamorphoses, is unlike anything else in Latin literature. Across 15 books, Ovid strings together more than 250 myths, all connected by the theme of transformation, hence the name Metamorphoses. The poem begins at the very beginning of time, with chaos giving way to the ordered world, and ends with Julius Caesar turning into a star in the heavens. In between, Ovid retells the entire mythological heritage of Greece and Rome, weaving one tale into another so that the stories feel like a continuous fabric rather than isolated episodes. It retells the famous mythical stories of, for example, Daedalus and Icarus, or Daphne and Apollo. In each of these stories, something happens that causes the characters to undergo a change or transformation. This change can be physical, like Daphne turning into a laurier tree to escape Apollo, but it can also be a psychological change, like the hubris that befalls Icarus when he flies too close to the sun, which causes his wax wings to melt. Ovid's style was very different from that of his contemporaries. Where Virgil sought grandeur and destiny, Ovid preferred playfulness, elegance, and irony. In his work, the gods have very human flaws. They are often driven by lust or jealousy, and his human heroes often struggle with desire and vanity. This lighter tone made him popular with the public, but it did not sit well with Augustus' moral reforms. In 8 AD, Ovid was suddenly exiled to the remote city of Tomis on the Black Sea. He described the reason as Carmen et Error, a poem and a mistake. The poem was almost certainly his Ars Amatoria, the Art of Love, a handbook on seduction that contradicted Augustus' family legislation. The mistake remains unclear, but scholars have speculated about a possible involvement in scandals with the imperial family. Whatever the case, Ovid never returned to Rome and spent his last years writing from exile. But despite his banishment, Ovid's influence only grew. The Metamorphoses became the single most important source of classical mythology for the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Medieval scholars mined it for allegory, Renaissance painters drew their subjects from it, and poets from Dante to Shakespeare borrowed his imagery. Another important literary figure is Livy, the historian whose Ab Urbe Condita, from the founding of the city, traces Rome history from its legendary origins through the Republic and into the early Empire. Livy combines storytelling with moral reflection, using historical events to illustrate virtues such as courage, loyalty, and piety. While his work is sometimes criticized for idealizing the past, it became a foundational text for understanding Roman identity. Finally, the poet Manilius contributed to more specialized genres. Manilius wrote the Astronomica, an ambitious didactic poem on astrology, blending science, myth, and poetry. Though his work is less widely read than the giants of the Golden Age, it demonstrates the diversity of literary activity in this period. By the end of the Augustan Golden Age, the political landscape of Rome had been completely reshaped. The centuries-old republic, with its senate, assemblies, and elected magistrates, had effectively ended. In its place, Augustus set up the Principate. He held almost all the real power, but kept the old republican offices and traditions as kind of a show. This system allowed him, and the emperors who came after him, to rule Rome like a monarchy, even if it didn't officially look like one. With the establishment of the Principate, political life became more centralized, and the freedom of public speech that had characterized the late Republic was curtailed. Senators, orators, and writers now had to navigate a climate where criticism of the regime could be dangerous. This shift in artistic freedom shaped the literature of the Silver Age, a period roughly spanning from the reign of Tiberius to the reign of Nero. Among the most prominent writers of this era is Seneca the Younger, whose philosophical works and letters provide insight into Stoic thought while reflecting the anxieties of life under an absolute ruler. In his letters to Lucilius, Seneca addresses moral questions, the management of anger, and the fleeting nature of life, all while writing under the shadow of Nero's increasingly tyrannical rule. His tragedies likewise explore human passion, guilt, and revenge, often echoing the intensity of Greek models, but filtered through a distinctly Roman sensibility. The historian Tacitus provides another cornerstone of Silver Age literature. In works like the Annals and the Histories, he documents the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties with a mixture of moral reflection and sharp political observation. Tacitus is famous for his conciseness, pointed irony, and attention to the corruption, ambition, and decadence of the ruling elite. Through his work, we gain both a historical record and a critique of power under the Principate. Other notable figures include the poet Lucan, whose Pharsalia recounts a civil war between Caesar and Pompey with epic grandeur and psychological insight. Martial, meanwhile, perfected the epigram, crafting short, witty, and often cynical poems that reveal the social and cultural life of Rome in miniature. Juvenal, in contrast, satirizes the moral decay and excesses of Rome under the emperors. His satires exposed corruption, greed, and the erosion of traditional values. The famous phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, comes from his work, highlighting his critique of a populace distracted by entertainment while political corruption flourishes. Pliny the Younger, a statesman and letter writer, offers a different perspective. His letters provide an intimate glimpse into Roman administrative life, social etiquette, and personal reflection. They also preserve eyewitness accounts of major events, such as the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, described in his famous letter detailing the death of his uncle Pliny the Elder. Through these letters, we see both the workings of imperial administration and the private life of a Roman elite, making Pliny an invaluable source for historians and literature alike. The Silver Age, therefore, is less about national glory or timeless myth, and more on the everyday and political realities of Rome under imperial rule. Writers had to navigate censorship and surveillance, and their works reflect both the brilliance and the anxieties of the city at its peak. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was facing mounting pressure on multiple fronts. Political instability had become routine, emperors were often overthrown or assassinated, and rival generals frequently contested for power. Economically, the empire struggled with inflation, overtaxation, and disruption in trade, while repeated invasions by Germanic tribes, such as the Goths and the Vandals, challenged the security of Rome's frontiers. Cities that had once thrived on commerce and civic life now faced unrest, and the population of Rome itself declined as disease, famine, and warfare took their toll. Amid these upheavals, religion was also transforming the empire. Christianity, which had begun as a small persecuted sect, gradually gained followers across the empire. The conversion of Emperor Constantine in 312 AD, followed by the Edict of Milan, legalized Christianity, making a profound shift in Roman culture and thought. By the end of the 4th century, under Theodosius I, Christianity became the official state religion. Pagan temples, rituals, and traditional literary patronage declined, while Christian writers increasingly dominated the intellectual landscape. The Latin language, which was already the language of law and administration, now became central to Christian worship, theological writing, and ecclesiastical scholarship. Christian authors like Tertullian, Jerome, and Augustine produced works in Latin that explored morality, theology, and the meaning of human life. These religious works would shape medieval European thought for centuries. In short, the classical age of the pagan Latin authors was over, and with the first Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate, the time for the Christian Church has begun. As the Western Roman Empire weakened under internal decay and invasions, the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed in 476 AD by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, conventionally marking the fall of the Western Roman Empire. While Roman political structures disappeared, the Latin language persisted. Over time, spoken Latin diverged into what would become the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Yet Latin would continue to exist in written form, where it was used as a shared medium of learning, administration, and the church. If you know something interesting about Latin literature, feel free to share it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how people from different places and backgrounds perceive Roman literature. I also have a question for you. In the area where you grew up, is it possible to take Latin classes in high school? Where I'm from, it's quite common. My own school offered Latin and I had 5 hours of it every week throughout my entire high school career. I would love to hear if it's similar or different in other countries, so let me know in the comments. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. It really helps me with the Roman algorithm. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. I will see you in the next video.